Hi.
Name again?
My name is Kayla.
Kayla. K-A-A.
Y.
K-A-L-A-Y.
Kayla.
I see. Hi, Kayla.
Hi. Thank you for giving us the time to talk to you. Me and my class were just wondering, approximately how long can we talk to you? We didn't want to keep you up too long.
About 40 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you.
How does that sound?
Perfect. Thank
Okay.
you.
Look at the camera there.
Hello, my name is Omar, and I'm gonna ask you my first question.
Okay, could you tell me your name again?
Omar.
Omar. Hi, Omar.
Okay. So, a famous Israeli poet wrote that a man is a model of his own homeland. In what way is your poetry impacted by your homeland?
In what way is my poetry...
Impacted by your homeland?
Well, that's a very good question, because I think every artist asks themselves that question. Every artist from every country. When I was a young man, I went to Europe. I went to Europe when I was about 25 or 26, and it was the first time that I'd left Australia. And when I went to Europe, I realised two things. The first thing I realised was that I had had a European education, because Australia was settled by the British. And my education was a very British European education. And it was like coming home to my own history. But also I discovered that I became homesick, and I also discovered that I stopped writing, and I wanted to go back home and write in my own home, because that's where I felt comfortable, and that's where I felt understood, and that's where I felt were the things I wanted to write about. So my homeland is the place I want to write about, and my homeland is the place where I feel understood.
You feel like in your homeland, you feel like you can write more, you express yourself?
Yes, I do. Yeah,
Okay.
I feel much freer.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Omar. That's a good question.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Bruno.
G'day, Bruno.
I'm gonna ask you a question.
Okay. I've looked at all your questions, and there's a lot of them.
But I'm only gonna ask you one.
Good.
Do you read books to help you get ideas to write poems?
The answer to that is yes, I do. I don't just write poems. I also write novels, and I write short stories, and I write essays. And I read a lot of novels, I read a lot of poetry, and I'm always looking for ideas. I'm looking for things that will make me want to write, or show me ways to write. So yeah, I do.
Thank you.
Sometimes I read something very beautiful, and that puts me in the mood to write something beautiful. And sometimes I read something funny, and that puts me in the mood to write something funny. But it has to be something that I admire. It has to be a piece of writing that I admire.
Okay.
Is that... Do you want to follow up with more question? With another...
Well, I only have one question, but what types of books do you read to get ideas?
Yeah. So, some of the poets that I read a French poet named Jacques Prévert, Prevert. You could look him up on Wikipedia, or you could ask Chris or your other teachers about Jacques Prévert. He wrote very simple poems, but they're also very emotional and very beautiful poems. Do you want me to read you one of his poems?
Yes.
Okay. This poem is called Breakfast. He put the coffee in the cup. He put the milk in the coffee. He put the sugar in the cafe au lait. With the coffee spoon, he stirred. He drank the cafe au lait, and he set down the cup without a word to me. He lit a cigarette. He made smoke rings with the smoke. He put the ashes in the ashtray without a word to me. Without a look at me, he got up. He put his hat upon his head. He put his raincoat on because it was raining. And he left in the rain without a word, without a look at me. And I took my head in my hand and I cried. Who do you think that man was?
You. The poet.
Who was the man he was watching have breakfast?
The poet.
Just while I was reading it to you, I realised what that poem is really about. That poem is really about a father not saying goodbye to his child in the morning.
Wow.
So that's the kind of thing I like to read, and he's one of the poets I like to read.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm Lorenzo.
Hello, Lorenzo.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you? What did you have for breakfast?
I had eggs and a toast with marmalade.
And did you say goodbye to your mum or your dad before you left?
Yeah, I did.
That's good.
Yeah.
You didn't just put your hat on your head and your raincoat on and walk out, did you?
No, I ate my breakfast.
You'll live a long life if you eat your breakfast every morning.
Yes, and it's delicious.
Good.
So,
Yes, Lorenzo?
I wanted to ask you a question that if you were not a poet, what would you be?
Maybe there's two answers to that question. And one answer is that as I think you'll discover as you go on in life, you don't really choose what you become. You just become what you are. You'll just find yourself one day in the middle of your adulthood and you'll be what you are. And it won't be as if you chose it. It'll just have happened. So you don't really choose to be a poet. It's just that's the way things turn out. That's one answer to that question. The other answer is, if I wasn't a poet, I think I would be another kind of artist, because I think that artistic expression is very important to me. So I imagine I would be a painter or I would be a musician if I wasn't a poet.
What would you paint if you were an artist?
I'd love to be able to paint landscapes that are very moody, and I would love to be able to paint people's faces with their expressions. And maybe I'm trying to do something like that with my poetry.
And another question that I wanted to ask you is that, do you ever regret or decided to not do a poem?
That's an interesting question. A couple of times I've written about my parents, and you might have seen a poem called The Sublime among the poems that you looked at, about my mother being 86 and my father being 91, about them being quite frail and sick, and about my mother needing a stick, and she walks around leaning on her stick as if she's banging on the ground letting the dead know that she's going to join them very soon down there under the earth. That's a poem that I can't show my parents. Lots of people have said to me they love that poem, and it's been published in a book called Best Australian Poem, but I can't show my parents because they would misunderstand it. So I don't exactly regret writing it, but I feel a bit funny about it.
And I have the last question is that how do you use your poems? Or do you just write them for fun? Or is there's another reason you write the poem?
I think that's a good question. I think the reasons you write poems change a bit over the course of your life. Probably early on when I was 15, 16, 17, I wrote the poems just for myself, out of a love of language, a love of words, and a love of how they made me feel. And sometimes I showed them to other people, and people would look at me and say, "Yes, Kevin, that's beautiful, but what does it mean?" And I couldn't tell them what it meant because I didn't even know what it meant. So it was really very private. And then I met other poets. When I was in my 20s, I met a lot of other poets, and we were reading in hotels and cafes and at universities. And that's when I realised that poetry could be like telling jokes, or it could be like, giving speeches. So then the reason for writing poetry became slightly different. It became a performance, a way of entertaining people. And now it's changed again. And now it's more to amuse myself, but I have enough experience, I think, to know what will both amuse me and perhaps also amuse the reader.
So the reasons of why you write poetry go different, like from your age?
Yes.
Or no? Is it like
But,
from your age? Like there's a
yeah,
reason different?
from age and experience, I think.
And another last question is that
Sure.
what do you eat for breakfast?
I eat toast with fig jam, and then another piece of toast with honey. And the figs come from the tree in my backyard, and the honey comes from our friends in the country.
That sounds good.
And then I have a strong black coffee. And then I put my hat on and my raincoat, and I say goodbye to my children. I don't just walk out the door.
Good asking you questions.
Yeah, good to meet you. Bye, Lorenzo. Let me guess what your name is. Juan?
Yeah.
Hello, Juan.
Hello. So
How old are you?
I'm 11 years old.
Uh-huh. And is English your first or second or third language?
Second.
Second. And what's your first language?
Spanish.
Uh-huh. And do you have a third language?
No.
One day you will. What will it be? French?
Maybe.
Italian? It depends who you fall in love with.
Okay.
Okay.
So, I have a question for you.
Good.
Okay. Do you have any main resources for your poetry?
Main resources. Yes. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by resources, but one of my main resources is my window. I look out the window, and what happens in the street, what I hear in the street, the weather I see, all those things find their way into my poem. So it's important to have a window. to let
Okay.
things into the poem. I also have a computer. I have my mind, but the other thing I have that's a big resource is my memories. And make sure you have lots of experiences as in the next 10 years, because those next 10 years of experiences you'll be thinking about for the rest of your life. And that's what happens with poetry too. I go back to lots of things I remember in my childhood, and lots of things that I remember happening to me around this area where I grew up as a child. So memory, a window, a computer, and a memory.
Okay, thank you.
And there's one more thing. Other poetry is a big resource. If I feel like I can't write or don't know what to write about, I read some poetry, and that wakes me up again and gives me ideas.
Okay. Bye.
Good to talk to you. See you, Juan.
I'm Macarena.
Macarena?
Yes. So I'm gonna ask you a question. What do you think about when you're writing poems?
What do I think about when I'm writing poems? Writing poems is, what can I say? It's a very emotional thing to do, but it's also quite a technical thing to do. And I'm thinking about trying to keep the language I use as fresh and as surprising and as vivid as possible.
Well, that's interesting.
Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does.
I don't want to say the same old tired things that people have been saying forever. So I want to in some way say the same old things, but say them in new ways. So I have to think about the vocabulary I use. I have to think about whether I'm writing in long lines or short lines. I have to think about whether the poem's aggressive or peaceful, and how that's going to change the words and change the phrases. I've got to think about whether I want my poem to rhyme or to only rhyme sometimes. So there are lots of things to think about, and then sometimes I need to think about whether I want the poem to be a sonnet or something different, a villanelle or terza rima or another form. So there are forms that you write into that require you to shape the language.
Well, that sounds interesting. I think it's pretty cool to be a poet, actually.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
It's
And it's
my
good that
habit.
you love what you do.
That's good. I hope you write some poems. Do you write poems?
Yes.
Has anyone written any poetry on your plaster? On your
Yes.
arm?
In writing, we are doing poetry, so
Yes.
we're writing poems.
Good. But how did you break your arm?
Well, yesterday they put us a homework that we had to write 5 poems of ourselves. So
Yes.
we had to write poems that describe us.
Yes.
Yes.
So how did you break
And
it?
what was your first line?
So you can be who you want, and you don't have to force yourself to be someone you don't have to be.
Yes. That's very good. So hold up your left arm. What happened?
I was playing soccer and I broke my wrist.
I hope it heals quickly. Talk to you.
What?
Good to talk to you.
Oh, thank you. Good to talk to you as well.
And keep writing poetry.
Okay. Bye.
Have you got any other questions that you want to ask? Okay.
What's your favorite thing to do when you're not writing poems?
When I'm not writing poems, my favourite things to do, I like to go swimming, and I like to go to movies. So I go and see a lot of movies, and I swim every day.
That's cool. I like to go to the movies too.
That's good. Too fast or too slow?
I don't know.
Am I spending too much time with each person?
No. I don't know.
Okay.
What do you say?
Somebody said no.
How are you doing?
I'm going okay. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you a question. Is the poem negotiation based on your life? Is it something that really happened?
Oh yeah. Yes, that is something that really happened. My 11-year-old son is now 21.
Whoa, that was a lot of years ago.
That was a lot of years ago. And he gets very embarrassed when I read that poem out. But people love to hear it because they think it's very funny.
Like when I read
But so
it,
yes, that did happen.
like when I read it, I was like a little bit shocked because like getting money from the how do you say it? The yeah, like asking pay rise and all of that. I have another question for you. Like,
Yeah.
what's your strategy to write catchy poems?
Yeah. I don't know. I suppose I've got my eyes open and my ears open all the time. I'm looking out for things. I'm hoping all the time to find interesting things happening to me that I can write about. Today, I was talking to a friend who used to live in my street. She had a family. She had 3 children, 1 teenager, and 2 children pretty close to your age. And in this suburb last year, at night in the main street, a woman was murdered. And since that happened, her children were not able to sleep. They were very scared. And they went to a doctor and they went to a psychologist, and the doctor said, you must move out of Brunswick and you must get a bigger house for the children so the children have their own room to sleep in. So they went to another suburb. They rented a very big house, and each child has their own very big bedroom now in this safe suburb.
And
The children don't like it. The children insist on dragging their mattresses out into the corridor and sleeping beside the parents' bedroom door in the hallway. So that's a good story, and maybe I'll write a poem about that.
But like how many days ago or like weeks?
They moved about 2 months ago.
Ah. So like it was very good talking to you, and I liked a lot the answers that you gave it to me to write poems.
Was that a question?
No, like statement.
Uh-huh.